What's up, everyone? Sam here from byte.com, and in this video, I have something fun for you. So the other day, I spoke with Erik from the YouTube channel Program with Erik, where he talks all about Vue.js and front-end development. And we wanted to talk about what are the differences between normal coding interviews and coding interviews specifically for front-end developers. So we did an interview. In this video, you'll learn all about how to prepare for a front-end interview specifically. So where is that the same as an algorithmic interview? How is that different? And then I also let him interview me, and that's over on his channel. We'll include the link in the description, and we talk all about algorithmic interviews. So let's run the introduction and we'll get right into the interview. All right, thanks Erik for joining me here today. I'm so excited to get into this because we're going to be talking all about front-end interviews specifically. And I really appreciate you joining me here because this is honestly not as much my area of expertise. And I know like you're super deep on the JavaScript side, doing a lot of stuff with Vue over on your YouTube channel. So without further ado, I want to just go ahead and jump right in here. And to start with, I'd love if you could just give us a brief overview of kind of what people should be expecting if they are going to do a front-end interview specifically, and maybe how that would differ from sort of your typical algorithmic style coding interview.
Yeah, so front-end interview is definitely a lot different than the algorithm interviews out there, but they do have some similarities that the interviewer is really trying to find out your capabilities and abilities. What can you provide to the organization that you're interviewing for? What's your skill level and a lot of things. And also, how you think. I think algorithm interviews do that really, really well. I mean, you're literally taking an algorithm and thinking it out and writing it out, and usually you have to walk through it. While in the front-end interview, a lot of times the interviewer wants to know some of those similar things. What's your thought process? How would you solve these type of problems? And usually there's a couple of ways they do that. So kind of one of the most common ways they do that is they may just ask you some questions about typical questions you might see on the job, JavaScript questions, CSS questions, HTML questions, or if you're going for a position that's specific for a certain framework like Vue.js or React or Angular or Svelte or whatever it is, they may kind of start asking you those type of questions, things that you would know if you're a front-end developer of those technologies. It does have its drawbacks and pluses and minuses. Some people think that, well, why can't you just Google all those questions? I mean, why do you even ask people that? But I think if you don't ask kind of like the JavaScript type trivia questions, but you ask actual like concepts, I think that really helps. Maybe framing questions, like some interviews, they'll frame it as a scenario and what you would do in certain situations. I think that's also really common too. The other way interviews happen on front end is they'll give you like a take-home assignment. That's common too. And there's also ones where you'll have both. You'll have like some questions, you'll have a take-home test, you have multiple rounds of interviews. Those are all quite common. And the take-home test is more like they'll give you assignment to connect to some backend API and then display the information. And so there's a lot of things you should keep in mind in there too. So that's kind of the similarities and differences between an algorithm and a front-end interview from what I've seen.
Yeah, no, I've definitely seen, I think that the take-home tests in particular are becoming more and more common across the board, because I've definitely seen a lot of even more like full stack positions. Obviously, you're not doing something front-end specific, but you're still having to do that take-home test. And I'm curious to hear, like, in your experience interviewing people and in your experience working with front-end engineers, like what are the sorts of things that you're actually looking for when they're going through this interview process? Because I think if we can have a clear picture of what it is that our interviewer is looking for us to do, or like looking to learn from us, it gives us a much better idea of how we can then demonstrate those skills.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Could you repeat the question one more time? I'm sorry.
Yeah, just what are you looking for when you are interviewing someone?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, the first thing is, can they get things done? Obviously, if they can actually get things done. And let me kind of frame it like as if we're doing a take-home test. So some of the things I would look for there would be usually the technology stack that we've given them. We would see how they implemented things in that technology stack. Have they read the requirements of the take-home test? So that's pretty common. People will get these and they won't actually read it in detail. So they'll miss some common things, like they may not connect to the API the correct way. They may not display the correct information. It's also, have they thought about some really common things like performance? Have they ran it through a Lighthouse test, which is a tool that you can use in Chrome that, or there's a few other tools to see how fast the site loads. Have they thought about accessibility? Which, do they even know what accessibility is? I've gone in interviews and asked people what accessibility is, and they never even heard of it. Do they, have they thought about any trade-offs? So if we've given a take-home test and it's 3 hours long, maybe they didn't have enough time to work on it. So maybe they put in a library in there, and that's okay, but it's good to call that out. So one thing I really like in take-home tests is if people can include a document or like a Google Doc or part of the email with the take-home test of the trade-offs of what they did. So maybe they put in a front-end library, which would increase the bundle size, which means it may not be as performant, but they were able to add that in, to add in the accessibility requirements of the project, and also just to be a little bit quicker and faster. Also, kind of looking for the, like, how complicated the app is. It's really easy to create an app and overcomplicate it, like having layers and layers deep, and that's usually a bad sign. And also, another thing that you may want to look at too is how, like, responsive the app is. Like, have they thought about different screen sizes? So does it work on a mobile site as well as a full desktop site? And then even have they thought about really large monitors? Is it going to stretch the whole website out? I mean, these little things, there's a little attention to detail when you start doing interviews that you've got to be really, you got to really keep in mind when, especially doing things like a take-home test, which you should put effort and time into. That's another thing. If they give you like 3 or 4 days to do the take-home test, don't try to do it on the day right before it's due and just kind of half-ass it and put in an hour in. Take that full 3 days and try to work on it a little bit every day, and try to, put some time and effort into it, and don't just try to rush it. So, I mean, those are a few things that I would look for.
Yeah, no, I think those are all like some really good suggestions. Like a couple that definitely I really resonate with are, one, like including some explanation of like what you did and what your thought process was. Just realize like this is sort of that example. It's an example of like essentially a remote interview where you don't get an opportunity to talk to the person, right? You don't get a chance to share what you're thinking. And so finding a way to share that and a way to convey that makes a big difference, especially when you decide to include some library that's way bigger, but maybe you're thinking about, oh, there are all these things that we could add into this application down the road that this library would help us with, or there's some other trade-offs there. So I think that's really good. I also, something that I see a lot of people talk about is the amount of time that it takes to do take-home projects. And I think that I'd be curious your thoughts on this as well, but I know from my perspective, I would generally tell people, you do need to put in the time to do the take-home project right. But if the take-home project is going to be too much time, there is no requirement that you do the take-home project. It's only a requirement if you want to apply for that particular job, right? Like, you don't have to do the take-home project. It's just that that's the requirement for that particular role. So you're welcome to, so if you feel like the take-home project is taking you too much time or is too involved, then feel free to look at other roles, but realize that like the company is hiring for that role. And so if you want to play their game, you kind of have to play by their rules. And I'm curious your thoughts about that as well.
Yeah, it kind of reminds us when we're talking about algorithms, like it feels like interviewing in general, look on Twitter, on tech Twitter, and look at people talking about interviewing. It's a very controversial subject, which is funny because,
To say the least.
it's very polarizing, I suppose. And on one side, on the algorithm side, people are like, why do we have algorithm interviews? That's not work we've ever used in our day jobs. And then on the kind of the other side of the interviewing where people doing take-home tests, people are like, wow, why, how can you give someone a take-home test and not pay them for that take-home test? You're just trying to get free work. And I think for most companies, they're not looking for free work when they give take-home tests. They're not trying to take your take-home test and put it into their code base. Now, it has happened. Like, definitely, if you search around, you'll find a case where some shady company was just looking for software developers to do free work for them, and they did take-home tests and they put them in their code base. But I think for the most part, that's pretty uncommon. So there is going to be companies that are looking for you to do, like I did the example of 4 days. Some people think if a take-home project takes more than like 2 or 3 hours, you should pay them. But you're just gonna it's going to be on a company by company basis. I know, like, I can't remember. There's a handful of companies that like explicitly say, hey, we'll pay you for a day of your time to do this take-home project. And then some companies say they won't. So like to your point, you said about, playing the game, that's the game you're going to have to play. If the company is going to say this project's going to take a day, then you could be like, listen, I don't have time. I can't do it. It's, and you have every right to do that. And they can either counter and say, okay, don't do it all, or we'll move you on, or you just don't get the job. I don't think, I don't know if I haven't seen any correlation between companies that give these really large take-home tests and like, I don't think that's like necessarily a red flag. Like if you see one of them that's going to take you a day, that you should be like, oh my God, that this is a bad company. Sometimes it's just whoever is putting together the interview, they just don't realize how difficult it is, or they don't realize that, maybe we shouldn't give someone a day project, or maybe they think it's going to take an hour and then you get into it and you're like, wow, this is going to take way longer. So I think I would normally just give them the benefit of the doubt and keep, take your own judgment, like how much time you have and if you can do it or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think like think about how poorly scoped projects are like in your actual job. It's not necessarily easy to think how long something's going to take someone, and one engineer's hour might be equivalent to another engineer's like 2 days. So you never really know. I will also say one of the things that I really encourage people to do that you should think about is that you shouldn't be applying for hundreds of different jobs, right? Like take-home tests that take a long time are only really a problem if you have like dozens of companies all wanting you to do these. But if you get laser focused about what companies you're targeting and what companies you're actually interviewing for, and you really put in the work and you show them why you're a good candidate, then you shouldn't be doing tons and tons of interviews. You should be like really dedicating the effort on just those few companies that are going to be, a really, really good fit for you.
Yeah, I've heard that too. I've seen people, I think this happens quite often with new developers when they're trying to get into software development. Either they're self-taught, or even sometimes it happens like with people who are coming from a boot camp or CS degrees, where you hear them like, I had to do 200 resumes and I finally got the job. And I always wonder,
you see a
like,
lot of those on Reddit.
Yeah, like if you look on Reddit, like some guy's done 300 resumes and they finally got a job. And I always wonder, like, after like resume, 120 or 75 or even just like 22, maybe you should have why? Maybe you should change your approach and try to figure out if are you not even making it to the part where they give you the take-home test, or are you failing these take-home tests over and over again? And maybe you can change up. I'm privileged to say that I have a job, and I know a lot of people don't. So I know it's hard for people out there. So I'm not trying to say it's easy, and this is definitely not easy. It's really difficult when you start interviewing, and there's a lot of mental games you have to play. But I think trying to be, introspective enough to try to figure out what you're doing wrong in these interviews and then learn from them is going to be an important step next time you put out your resume.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think anyone's saying it's easy, right? Like neither of us are saying that this is something that's easy, that, you're not going to have struggle with challenges. But I think that it's kind of that stoic mindset of like, I need to focus on the things that I can control. you can't control like what other people perceive when they receive your resume. You can't control how they, think about you in your interview. But what you can control is what you send them. You can control that, like do that research ahead of time and really understand what they're looking for and put the effort in to customize your resume to that company. Take the time to, as Erik was talking about, really like make sure your take-home project is well documented and the code is clear and that you explained your thought process. Like these things take more effort, but they are the things that you can control, and they're going to make a huge difference in what those actual results are. But you can't just say like you don't want to just pass the blame off to everyone else. You want to think about like, what is there that's under my control, even if other people are deserving of blame, right? Like other people may be deserving of some blame, but that's not helpful. So you have to think about like, what is it that I can control and how can I make a difference? And I do want to transition a little bit and ask you one more question before we sort of wrap up here. I know that like a lot of people when we're interviewing for roles that are more specific, so like a front end role or even something around a specific framework, there's a lot more of like questions that might be really laser focused on that one thing. And so I'm curious how you would think about preparing in terms of like both making sure that you're like making your resume as strong as possible without like inflating your skills and then getting screwed in the interview, but also like if they're asking you questions about say Vue.js and you like don't know about that particular function, like how would you approach that in your interview?
It's interesting. I've seen two approaches on resumes. I mean, some people think, I've seen recruiters like send resumes to companies that just have they'll have a candidate and they'll put like 4 paragraphs of buzzwords of every single technology they've ever touched in their career. I don't think that's the right way, but I think that their philosophy is that maybe that'll get through the HR people and that'll get through to whoever, because maybe when you apply for jobs, sometimes they use software to scan for keywords and try to narrow down the candidates. I think the danger in that is that if you create resumes like that and when you're applying for places, if they call you out on any of those technologies, you'll be like, you won't know them. I think in that situation, you'd have to be just honest and say, hey, I just don't know this technology. I used it in this two companies ago and we did this with it, but I can probably get up to speed on it pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. I think honesty is always a really good path during interviews. You never want to lie, but you also understand that it's a little bit of a game between you and the employer. You don't want to lay all your chips on the table at once. So you don't want to give them ammunition to disqualify you, but you also don't want to be dishonest. So obviously things like you wouldn't want to tell them your pay up front if you.
Yeah, please don't do that. If you were thinking of, or if they ask, they're not allowed to ask. So just don't tell them.
Yeah, and I guess there's state laws. Like there's.
I know at least in New York, they're not allowed to ask at all.
Right, and some people who don't know that will.
And you can also, even if they are allowed to ask, it's really easy to deflect. Just say, I'd love to talk about that at a later stage. I first want to figure out if this is a good fit first. Something to that effect.
Exactly. Yeah. So obviously, that's a really good tactic, and then. Just make sure you emphasize on your resumes the technologies that you do know well and that you think would be a good fit. And by taking what their job listing was and then pulling out the technologies that you know really well and making sure you highlight that, not just in your resume, but during your interview, that can help you out too. And then it's not a bad idea, just like you interview and practice for an algorithm interview, you should also practice for your front end interview. So that could be anything from just looking at the official documentation of some of the technologies that you're listing out in your resume and that the company is using. So that way you can talk intelligently about it. I mean, I think like one common question I've seen people ask is like, tell me like the life cycle hooks of XYZ technology, or tell me how the internals work, or just make sure you can talk intelligently about it. I mean, there's so many, like if you just Google like Facebook, React quiz or Vue.js interview questions or Facebook interview questions, you'll see like hundreds of questions on it. And just going through each one of those, spend a couple hours making sure you can talk intelligently about that those technologies will help you a long ways. And then maybe even create a sample project if you want, just to keep, make sure it's all fresh in your mind, especially if you haven't used those technologies in a while.
Yeah, no, I think those are some great tips to wrap up on. Basically, be honest, sell yourself, but be honest, and make sure that you review everything that you're going to be doing in your interview. You should be reviewing beforehand. And so let's go ahead and wrap up here. Is there anything that you want to share with anyone, anything that you're working on? I'd love to, let people know where they can find you and where they can learn more if they're interested, especially in front end and Vue.js stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, first also to end that point, when you're doing interviews, don't be modest. Like, it's time for you to brag. It's time for you to go over the top and explain how you really improved companies. Keep that in mind. Yeah, if you guys are interested in like these type of questions, if you're interested in the front end in JavaScript, I do a lot of Vue.js, but I'm also expanding out to doing the back end, Node.js, Java, things like that. You can check out my YouTube channel at erik.video. Actually, it's erik.video or eric.video. Yeah, just go to that. Or you can just search for Program with Erik on YouTube.
Awesome. Thanks, Erik. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
All right, there you have it. That was pretty great, right? Thank you again, Erik, for coming on here, and make sure that you definitely go check out the interview that he did with me in the description. Go check out his channel, Program with Erik, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon.